evening everyone and welcome to tonight's Executive Committee meeting. My name is Asghar Mahmood, I'm Chairman of the Executive Committee. I will do introductions to my left.
Rose Ross, Chief Executive.
Good evening, Phillips, Director of Play.
Gemma Louise Wells, Head of Finance. Kevin Spencer, Director of Resources.
Councillor Tom Whip.
David Whip, I'm Executive Member for Resources.
Peter Gregory from Property.
Michael? Sorry.
Councillor Martin Stone.
Councillor Sarah Goodman Price.
Councillor Ash Sutcliffe.
Councillor Kieran McGodry.
Mohammed Iqbal, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Housing.
Councillor Yvonne Tennant.
Councillor Hamid.
Iftikhar Khari, Head of Economic Growth.
David Walker, Assistant Director, Operational Services.
Phil Riley, Green Spaces Manager.
Paul Preston, Democratic Services Manager.
Al Culshaw, Head of Legal and Democratic Services.
Thank you very much. Do you have any declarations of interest?
Chair, not a declaration of interest but apologies from Councillor Dorothy Lord.
Thank you. That's fine, thank you. Okay, the next item is public questions time. Receive for a maximum of 15 minutes questions from members of the public on issues which do not appear on the agenda. Thank you. Next item is the minutes of the previous meeting.
Move those.
All those in favour? Further profit?
Good evening, everybody. This report sets out the request from Financial Resources for further Head, and we asked for a recommendation of a commitment of $95,500 from the capital budget. And part of the reason is, or the whole of the reason is that originally the site was to be developed for 200 houses back in 2017, and subsequent site investigations and technical constraints on the site has set out that there's a development of 129 houses on that particular land, where 26 are affordable and 103 are destined to be for private sale. Now, since the work has started on that site, there has to be an access road on that site to allow for development of the land around that, and also the site has been sort of subject to a number of technical and ecological constraints and challenges within that process. In the first instance, there was a requirement for relocating of existing badges into new sets, and the second part of it was to do some ground investigations to carry out some borehole tests to see for mine shafts. So back in February, there was the initial site investigation to find out if there was any mine shafts, and there was one that was potentially uncovered at approximately 30 metres depth. So the current thing is that we are undertaking another set of mine investigations on that site to sort of fine-tune and finally locate this mine shaft and find out what the technical challenges are in doing the grouting works to enable the land to be developed. This means that the access road won't be adopted by LCC until the mine works and the embankment work is actually done. So after that is that there's been initial outline of work that was estimated to be about £65,000 back in September, but that figure has been revised now with more clear details in terms of designs and also more details in terms of site investigation, which has bumped up the figure to approximately £95,000. And the table set out in the report sets out the differences between the original and what the current request is. Now, we're hoping that when I wrote this report that once we do the investigation that perhaps we didn't find additional mine shaft. Unfortunately, that's not to be the case, which means that we would have to invest in a certain amount of money to finish off the investigations and also do the grouting works associated with the mine shaft, and also doing the embankment work as well to enable the road then to be adopted by LCCs, which allows us then to transfer that land over to the developer for development of the housing.
Thank you. Councillor Iqbal?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I remember when planning permission was given in 2017 for these houses, and in an ideal world, the houses would have today been occupied up there. But you know, IFTI, I think, has outlined the reasons why there's been delays, and I think we now need to see this scheme through to completion because the access road is in. Just needs the additional work that's doing there. So in terms of a recommendation, I'm happy to move that the additional commitment of £95,500 is financed from the capital budget.
Councillor Wick?
Chair, I'm happy, well, not happy, but content to second, but I think we need to add a further clause to the resolution. I don't think we've any way of getting out of the mine shaft work. It needs to be grouted, and you know that comes at a cost. However, there's £38,000 in here, which is for works to make the access road up to make it to an adoptable standard. And the story there is that that work was contracted to Lancashire County Council for their engineers to draw up the scheme, supervise the work to create an access road that was to an adoptable standard. So Lancashire County Council have done that. Presumably we've paid fees to Lancashire County Council for them to supervise the work. And then Lancashire County Council has said they won't adopt the road. Now, you know, as far as I'm aware, they did the design, they supervised the work, and it was to their specification. So why on earth is Pendle Council picking up the tab when Lancashire County Council comes along and says, well, it isn't up to scratch? You know, they were in charge of the job. They should have constructed the roadway to their satisfaction in order for it to be adopted. So I'm aware that we have made, and we've made repeated representations to LCC, but I think, well, as yet, we haven't got anywhere with that. So I think the further clause to the resolution is that we strongly reaffirm our request to Lancashire County Council at the highest possible level for them to pay for the completion of the embankment work in order for the roadway to be at an adoptable standard. And I just cannot see how you give the job to the county council, they do the job, and then the county council turns around and says, oh, it didn't any good. So, you know, they've got to cough up for that, without a doubt. So, subject to including that, I would second it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wick. Yeah, and I think one of the previous Pearl Board meetings, we kind of talked about this, and you asked our Chief Executive Rouse to kind of pick this up with the LCC at the highest level, which I think Rose will ask Rose to come in a second. But also there must be some kind of email correspondence between our engineering department and LCC. So there must be some kind of evidence there to kind of to show that the works are being to the standard that they're going to. Rose.
Thank you, Chair. I wrote to the Interim Chief Executive of Lancashire County Council last week, and then when I bumped into him a couple of days later, I mentioned it to him as well. So it is on his radar. They are looking into this, and the email flagged some of the issues if he helped draft the email. So we can do a bit more chasing on that one, but clearly Mark Wynne, that's the interim chief exec, is looking into this matter.
Chairman, I'm happy to accept what Councillor Whip has added to the resolution, because I think that will give Rose some additional political leverage as well to say, look, the pressure's on from the executive and on behalf of the council. So yeah, I'm happy to accept that.
All those in favour? The next item is Bankhouse Road site. Councillor
Yeah,
sorry.
No, sorry.
Deputy, yeah. It's okay.
I was going to report on it, but
Yeah, sure.
okay. So Bankhouse Road is being discussed at a number of meetings, and the recommendations, the request of the report is that the executive agrees to place the site on the open market and seek offers for development of housing, and also delegate the authority to the Director of Place for any sales that may well come forward. And the reason for the recommendation is to enable the land to be then developed, which has been vacant for over 10 years. And it will also help in terms of making that decision-making process a bit quicker during this disposal. The background to this site has been that the site was originally rows of terrace houses that was actually under the HMR programme, and these houses were developed, and then as the HMR programme came to an end, those houses or that site has been left vacant for many, many years. Now, originally the idea was to have an extra care facility on that site, and the funding systems at the moment or at the time allowed for it to be considered, but then the structures for funding changed, which made the site was not viable for extra care facilities. A report was put to the Pearl Board in January earlier on this year, which said that we'll move away from the actual extra care scheme and look at affordable housing. So a number of iterations in terms of financial appraisals were done, including a grant that was awarded to Pendle Council for £200,000 for some infrastructure work as well. So Pearl has had a look at this and looked at the viability of the scheme, and because of the units that can go on there in terms of 43 units, the idea was that the land is almost at nil value, because the freeholds and the leaseholds, particularly the leaseholds, are not being accounted for in terms of disposal. So they've said that basically that until that issue is resolved, that it's not a financial viable option for them. This has forced our hand to enable us to go back to the wider market to test the market, to see what that land, including the unaccounted freeholds that we don't have access to, and what sort of response do we get from the market. So in September 24, the Pearl Board agreed that we test the market, see what the value of that land is, and then bring that back in terms of numbers associated with that particular site. So we're asking for the executive to test the market and bring the numbers back, and then enable us to have a further conversation in December to the Pearl Board to see if a viable scheme can be developed on the back of that.
Chairman, just before I speak, can I just clarify though, the recommendations are simply that we market the site on the open market and give delegated authority to fill it. There's nothing that talks about bringing it back to anywhere in December.
Yeah, sorry. In the Pearl meeting, that we brought back a report to determine what the value of the site was, and having done a market test on that site. So there was a decision in the Pearl Board to enable that to happen.
I mean, I'm not privy to what Pearl discussed, but Chairman, I think it'd be wrong then for us as a council to market the land, to test the market in inverted commas. I think if there's private sector involvement and the private sector are happy to take it off our hands and develop it for housing, because it's an area that I represented for a long time and grew up around that area as well, and I think the market is there for the private sector to do something with it in terms of what the demand is around the area. I know there's been various connotations of what could be done there, but clearly during the last government the funding wasn't following the ideas that both this council had and other partners had as well. So I'm happy that we move the both recommendations. Just a slight addition to recommendation 2, that delegated authority be given to the Director of Place in consultation with yourself as leader and Councillor Whip as deputy leader before any sale is agreed. I think if there's somebody from the private sector is willing to come forward, let's just crack on with it rather than it going to and fro between Pearl Board, private sector and council, because that interest could then fall away.
Just before I bring you in, Councillor, Phil, do you want to just...
Yeah, very, very briefly. I think, if I may, I think Councillor Iqbal's suggestion is actually a very, very helpful one, to be honest with you. I think this is a decision for PBC, not for the Pearl Board. So if members are happy to agree that delegation to myself in consultation with yourself and council, I think that is a very sensible way forward.
Thank you. Councillor.
I'm happy to second, Chair. I think the Pearl Together involvement is a bit of a red herring. The prime concern is to try and get the site developed, and obviously if there's any value in the land, then the council gets a capital receipt which can be reinvested elsewhere. The thing that concerns me, Chair, is that my assumption had been that we had claim title to all of the land, and it turns out that we've only got a leasehold interest in about half of it, and that means that any purchaser would take that into account in any offer that they made. Now, I'm not clear why that wasn't cleared up when the compulsory purchase went through originally, 10 or a dozen years ago, however long it is. But is it possible to take some further action, if necessary, to establish a freehold on the whole of the land? Now, my understanding is that nobody knows who the freehold interest is. In other words, there's 800 odd years left on the lease, but nobody knows who owns the freehold on that. I'm sure it would be possible to CPO it again and get the freehold, and I might be oversimplifying things and people might correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that you just have to put whatever that value is to one side in case the owner or owners come along and say, hey, that's my land, I want me tuck certainty out of it. I'm assuming that given that it's got 800 odd years lease left, that the value of the freehold will be pretty minimal. So, Chair, in the eventuality that either nobody comes forward willing to develop, or they offer effectively negative value, we look at that obtaining a clean title. I don't know whether anybody can advise us whether that would be straightforward. I know it wouldn't be quick, but it may be that we need to do it.
Thank you.
Well, Chairman, I was slightly embarrassed that if only I had my property experts sat next to me. So I don't know this. I mean, there is possibilities of, in that situation, possibilities of indemnity insurance being obtained, and I don't know how cripplingly expensive that would be. I don't necessarily think it would be. So the fact that it is leasehold, not freehold, might not be significant in terms of value as all that. I'll speak a bit off the top of my head there, but nevertheless, I take the point, and I'll ask people who know more than me about what you asked the council.
Yeah, I think this issue again was discussed at the previous Pearl Board meeting. I think Tim also said about indemnity insurance. So it's an option. So, but let's look at that. Councillor Coleman Price.
So I was just really going to say very much the same thing, except that we are under time pressure, aren't we, Philip, for this one? And that's why it was going to be brought back to the December version of this committee. And because we're under time pressure, I would just advise that we do that work in the background on the title right now, not sequentially, not in December, but to try to get ahead. Because it's going to be, we're going to have to deal with this if we develop it or if Pearl develops it. We're going to have to deal with that because it's got roads running through it. So it's something that we have to face. But also, if we did solve it and there was a private developer interested, we have done that work and made it more saleable and more attractive and hopefully more valuable. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. That's fair point. So all those in favour? Next item is co-option to climate change working group. Councillor Chandler?
Chair, I'd move that we accept the nominations from the bodies listed in the papers.
Thank you. Second.
I'd second that, Chair. I think there are 3 existing members of the working group, co-opted members, who wish to remain, and I think we could incorporate that within the resolution, and then everybody's on a level footing.
Councillor Cobble-Price.
Just to say that leaves one vacancy on the working group, and that one vacancy, I'm very much hoping, speaking to officers, could be a representative from a school or colleges who'd be prepared to do liaison with other educational establishments. So there's just one more to come. We just want to find the right person.
Thank you. The next item is
It's been moved, isn't it? Well, we'll do.
we can have another vote on it.
No, we voted on it.
Oh, we want to,
Next item is Trafalgar House, Nelson, new development proposals, and I do have a speaker on this, Dr. William Stevenson. Yeah, you have a maximum of up to 5 minutes, so yeah, if you can, please stay within the 5 minutes.
Councillors, along with the people of Nelson, I'm urging you to vote to save Trafalgar House and prevent demolition tonight. Trafalgar House is an important part of the Nelson Town deal, designed to revitalise the town. The deal website states that the project is about improving local buildings and assets and bringing back into use vacant or underutilised sites. The Nelson Town deal is about building, then, not demolition. The deal's website describes Trafalgar House as, quote, a prominent Nelson building, and says the plan is to restore the heritage front of the building on Market Street and to find exciting new purposes for the rest of the building to secure its future. Why then has this plan changed? A car park is not an exciting new purpose. A wrecking ball will not secure the building's future. Councillor, why are you ignoring the deal you struck? The deal site also flags up the importance of the town's strong built heritage, particularly in and around the town centre, with some beautiful buildings, including the town hall and old library, reflecting the town's history. Let's make Trafalgar House another one of those buildings. It was built as a technical school in the 19th century. It's a symbol of the area's industrial heritage, a signifier of the town's glories of the cotton industry, when Nelson drove the Industrial Revolution. It's also about the future, about the aspirations of the people of Nelson to rebuild their town by building on the past. And this is a valid argument because there are economic benefits. Historic England research shows that historic sites increase local economic growth. People want to shop and spend and socialise in attractive places which show real roots. The Victorian Society is well aware of this and is backing the petition on change.org, which I urge everyone here tonight to sign, entitled Save Trafalgar House, which already has over 1,100 signatures. What can we do with such a building? There is a clear need for facilities. Now the ACE Centre has closed, there is no longer any dedicated arts venue in Nelson, even though Combe, next door, in your borough, has 3 theatres. If not an arts venue, then Trafalgar House could be put to housing and commercial use. The council officer's report concedes that housing on the site's first floor can be done, as well as commercial use on the ground floor. It is quite affordable to do this if required. Another car park is pointless. Pendle Council's own figures say it would cost £200,000 to build. it would be an expensive white elephant when 150 new spaces are already planned in a new car park elsewhere in the town deal. Moreover, Historic England must be consulted on any planning application as Trafalgar House is in a conservation area. Historic England, as you probably know, are not big fans of concrete car parks and are very likely to oppose demolition, so Pendle Council will incur costs for a non-viable application and be back to square one. On the subject of costs, funding is available to restore the building. The officer's report states Pendle Council has £1.6 million from Nelson Town Deal budget to work on Trafalgar House. So the council must think more imaginatively, and we know you've had successes in this area before. The Pearl Partnership has regenerated an awful lot of properties in Whitefield Conservation Area. Well done. So what can Pendle Council do with 1.6 million and such a beautiful building? And it's not just about capital budgets, the building can bring in revenue income. The officer's report shows that Trafalgar House could bring in 10,500 a year to the council just in rent, never mind any other income the building can contribute to the local economy. Local people who care about Nelson are asking the council's executive not to turn their backs on Trafalgar House. Trafalgar House is a monument to the glories of Nelson and a symbol of hope for a better future. Councillors, we know you have Nelson's people whom you represent and the town's future in your hearts. Vote the right way tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. I have an email message from Roy Hubbard, a local council taxpayer. He wants me to read this message out to the executive committee members. We have a great opportunity to reinstate this significant building, and I hope it will be redeveloped for Nelson's community. I personally believe it could be transformed into affordable housing accommodation, residential accommodation for the private or public sector, bringing life back into Nelson Centre and help to boost the local economy. Pendle Council has a very proud tradition of working with local developers in achieving such a goal. Northlight in Byfield is a fantastic example of a local initiative. Let's hope we have a victory for Trafalgar House and a modern facility in Nelson, Nelson will be proud of. And bottom in brackets, who wants another car park? Thank you. Regards, Roy Hubbard. Councillors?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I mean, thank you to Dr. Stevenson for coming to speak. I think there's one thing that needs to be made clear. At the last executive, the resolution that went through wasn't for full demolition. It was for partial demolition. And I know some colleagues sat in this room set up a petition saying as though the executive had said that we wanted to demolish the whole building. That was not the case. So I think that record needs to be set straight. In terms of the reason that it's back on tonight is that we had a discussion and Councillor Whippard had suggested that we get some figures in terms of the partial demolition, because clearly somebody's going to have to pick up the tab at some point. Rather than just blindly going for partial demolition, I think the report is quite well balanced in terms of what it says. So Chairman, I'm happy to support what you moved last month, that we go for partial demolition at the back end of the building, because that is an eyesore and I don't think that will appeal to anybody, but we keep the frontage, which the people of Nelson and Pendle, I believe, still want. But in terms of the recommendations, there's 1 and 2 are fine. The third one, I think we just need to change that we support the partial demolition, but at the same time ask our officers and councillors together to work to bring that building back into use as quickly as possible.
Well, I will happily second that. I mean, the committee knows my personal views on this. It's a grand building. It's in Byfield Conservation, as the Doctor said recently. It's part of our heritage. It's a prime site within Nelson Town Centre, and it's part of the wider Nelson Town Centre regeneration. And the person who designed our civic building here also designed the building of Trafalgar House. You know, the same, architecture and materials for that matter. I know civic building is a listed building as well as Trafalgar House isn't, but like I say, it's part of our heritage, and I think it's a grand building that we need to keep. So I agree that we should go for partial demolition and explore some other opportunities available to bring it back into use and bring that footfall and part of the wider regeneration. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to be the most popular person in this room, or perhaps in Nelson, but I am going to advocate that the building in its entirety should be demolished. And I do so primarily with a hard-hatted financial hat on, where Pendle Council hasn't got the wherewithal to spend more and more money on services. The government's just done its budget yesterday. I did not see any suitcases full of cash coming up the M6 to ensure that Pendle Council had enough brass to run the services that we've got. And what the report before us tonight shows is that there is the potential, there's a risk of the revenue costs being £25,000 to £27,000 a year. That's £25,000 that we don't have, so it would have to come out of some other services. There was reference to the A Centre being closed, and why is the A Centre being closed? Because there isn't the money to operate it and use it as it was originally intended. We have done, well, I will say several feasibility studies, but we've got one very thorough feasibility study which looked at using the whole of the building, and the conclusion was that it just could not be operated without a significant revenue cost. I mean, far in excess of £25,000 a year. So I fully accept the demolition of the rear part of the building. I think councillors around the executive are going to agree to that clearly by what's been moved. The retention of the front part of the building sterilises use of the site, because in a temporary, in the medium term, there would be a car park there, but long term, having that frontage would allow a redevelopment of the whole of the site. By leaving the facade there, you've got a bit of backland that can't really be used for anything in the future. And I think that there is the possibility of an attractive, beneficial redevelopment of all of the site in the future. So I'm concerned about leaving a white elephant. There are all sorts of difficulties with using the front part of the building either as a commercial space on the ground floor, residential on the first floor, not the least of which that the ground floor isn't actually on the ground floor. You've got to get up to it. So in the cost, there's a platform lift to actually achieve DDA, Disability Discrimination Act access to the front door. I think because of that, the sensible thing to do is to demolish the whole of the building. I fully accept and sympathise with the view that it's a historic building, and I understand why people want to keep it. As I say, my view is put my hard hat on, look at the finances, and I think it's not going to cover its costs in the future. It will be a drain on Pendle Council. Certainly nobody will want to take it off his hands as an investment opportunity. And lastly, Chair, when the building was purchased, I can't remember how many years it was empty, but it was probably more than a decade that it was empty, and it's gone to rack and ruin. When it's so dilapidated, people can't actually go in it to inspect it because the building is in a dangerous condition. But when it was purchased in that sort of condition, it's got a little bit worse, but not that much worse. It was bought in order to knock it down, and that was the intention at the time. So I think it's, you know, fair enough. I accept, Chairman, there's going to be a majority, there's probably a majority on the council to keep the frontage. In a hard-headed way, I don't think it's the right thing to do, and across Pendle people will be paying for that when they'll see services closing on the doorstep. I think we should be pulling the zones in rather than taking on new liabilities, and it is a liability, not an asset. So I won't be voting for the resolution as put.
Yeah, I mean, I know your concerns, Councillor Wick. Personally, I think there's great potential. You know, when we're looking at all the different opportunities are available, you know, we could have like a one-off capital asset, capital receipt from this, or regular income that could create more than say £25,000 what that's going to cost. So I think there's great potential there. Just before I bring Councillor Sutcliffe in, can I ask Philip to kind of just comment?
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, Councillor made a number of points. Just want to kind of provide some further information on it if I can. Hopefully, we will get occupiers to the building, into the building, and if that's the case, then hopefully this will be a net revenue income to the council going forward. So hopefully that will be the case. But in the worst case scenario that we don't get an occupier and we have to run the building, what you can see in the table at figure 15 are very much the worst case scenario. So you'll actually see that what we have are full utility costs as if the building was occupied, we've got full cleaning costs if the building was occupied, we've got full maintenance costs if the building was occupied. Obviously if the worst was the building was not occupied, those costs would not be incurred on that level. So it's very much the worst case scenario, and in the situation the building was void, thinking that it probably wouldn't actually be £27,000 net revenue drain, but let's hope the building actually is occupied in that scenario.
That's good. Thank you very much. Councillor Sutcliffe.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously I sat here last month and said my bit, and I believe fully that we should keep this building. It seems like, and I'll echo some of the comments that have been made on the petition, civic vandalism. It's nonsensical to pull a building like this down in this day and age. We've been through far too many situations in the past where we've seen beautiful buildings torn down, and we look through pictures that pop up on Facebook history groups on a regular basis and we go, why on earth did they do that? Why did they pull that building down? We are sat here with the position of power where we can make those choices, or you, I guess, this evening, and have the power to make those choices. And I always wonder what went through their minds when they were pulling those buildings down, because they were so beautiful and usable and practical, because many of them are still standing now, as Trafalgar House does today. Now, I've got to pull you up a little bit, Councillor Iqbal, about your comments about my petition that I started.
What was it, yes?
1,133 people have signed because they agree that we should save Trafalgar House. Now, you said that I'd not mentioned a partial demolition. It says in black and white that Councillor Asjad Mahmood proposed a partial demolition. I don't agree with that. I said that at the last meeting. I don't agree with the partial demolition. It will be something. It would be great to keep something, but I think that actually we should be keeping everything. The whole building, as it stands, a big chunk of property, has a great value and it's a great asset for Nelson. Obviously, we've got all this Nelson Town deal money. There's a great future for Nelson if we look at how that money is being spent. We've only today heard the news, yesterday in the budget, heard about the Nelson long-term plan money as well. Absolutely delighted to hear about that, because obviously I sit on the board, as do other people around the table, and we want to see a good, positive future for Nelson. The money is there to do something. We're not in a situation where we're scrabbling around for 50 quid, and doing a whip round at the church to put lead on the roof. There's money there to save this building and utilise it. Now, if we get down the road and we can't find tenants and there's nobody using that building, we can sell the building. But we've saved it. We've saved it forever, or saved it for at least the next generation. We can't sit here and demolish Nelson's history and its heritage. This is not just Nelson's history, but it's Pendle's history. I'm not a Nelsoner, but I really care about this building. I really care about Nelson. And it's, you know, I joined you on the walk that we did around Nelson with the projections and the lights. And I was absolutely fascinated by learning more about the history of Nelson. It's a fantastic place. We've got to secure it. It's in a conservation area for a reason. Conserve it. You've got to do that. Now, obviously, you can make that decision this evening. In addition to all of that money side of things, we can look at the ecological side of this. Is it really practical on an ecological level to start putting extra car parks in a town centre? Now, I'm looking at Councillor Tom Whip here. We sit on the Climate Emergency Working Group and we discuss cars. You even recommended podcasting it about cars. And I know that from comments that you made in the past that you don't necessarily welcome cars in town centres and that pedestrians and active travel should be a way forward. So why on earth would we suggest putting a car park in a town centre when we believe in active travel? It makes no sense. It's a proposal in one hand and an action in the other. So we've got to bring those things together, think more solidly about the future of Nelson. We're going to be in a very different landscape in a few years' time once things like Pen and Rise start coming down. And hopefully that investment starts to secure some land values, starts to secure some property values, and the investment that you can make today with the money that is there then gives you a really positive capital receipt or a revenue receipt on an ongoing basis that we can use. And Phil's already said there is money to be made from this building. So I don't see it as a liability. If there is a cash liability going forward, then it's well worth it because we're securing the building.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just so we're all entirely clear on this, there is no financially viable option to retain the entire building. What the proposal in front of the members is to retain the historic front portion, and there is grant funding available to retain the historic front portion. But there have been 2, 3, 4 feasibility studies that looked at the entire building, and unfortunately there is no viable use for the entire building, but there is the possibility, should members wish to do so, to retain that historic front portion.
Councillor Tennant.
I'm fully for retaining the historic part of the building. In terms of financial viability, I didn't vote, but we've just voted to pour 95,500 down a mine shaft on a bill that should never have been started in the first place. That's hit problem after problem after problem for the last 7 years. So I think we should be preserving our history and not throwing good money after bad. And I don't think this is bad. I think we should save it.
Thank you. Councillor Colin-Price.
Thank you. I wrote to Historic England when we were talking about buying the building. And I'd been to P&R and they talked about buying the building then and getting money from the government to do so. And Historic England wrote back and said, we can't spend government money to knock down historic buildings in conservation areas. That's not what it's for. And if you read the Nelson Town deal, it's all about, a lot of it is boosting the economy and also boosting the heritage of Nelson. Now, as actually said, we're owners, we occasionally come to Nelson. But we've read these documents and we want them to succeed because Nelson's in our borough. So there you are, you've got a heritage building. I didn't know it was by the same architect as this building. It's next to the town hall, so it's in the setting of the town hall. It's important to this building. In the last few times I've been here, I've been going to have rather sentimental last looks at it, just in case next time it's not there. So I am very glad that this committee is at least looking at keeping the front of it, if not all of it. I do think Pendle Council is culpable because had Pendle Council acted before we bought the building, that's putting a 215 on, years ago, if we tried to stop the rainwater ingress when we bought the building, we might have been able to save the whole thing, and that would be marvellous, because facadism is actually a bit looked down on in heritage circles today. However, it would be much better than another void. Colne suffers from voids. Opposite the town hall, there's a void. It's a little car park. Kendal Council must have got something down in 1972 or something like that. If you go up and down Colne High Street, all the little voids, and you look back on these Colne, Lancashire Now and Then sites, they were all once grand and fabulous buildings, and Colne would be even more fabulous if they were still there. 6 car parking spaces for town hall staff, as in Colne. It doesn't really cut it, really. It's a bit sad. Here's a really shocking statistic for you. The average age, the average lifespan of a new public building is just 40 years. 40 years. So this whole thing that we've abused next door has hung on in there for well over 100 years. And if you think of it, when I told the Victorian Society this, they came straight back to me and they said, think about the ecology. Think about the used, spent carbon on that building. It was all used over a century ago, and now all you have to do is repair it. It's much less. If you think about the demolition, even though the report says, oh, you can shove loads of rubble in the basement, the demolition would be, from an ecological perspective, an absolute nightmare. It would be awful, and then you'd have to, obviously, bring loads of stuff on site to build a new thing, whatever it is, whether it's a car park or whatever. So the most sustainable thing, from an ecological perspective, is to repair that building. It always would be, rather than replace it with something that's going to have a very short lifespan. And there has been a lot of research. I sent a document to Philip Spur to actually show that heritage in a town subtly boosts the economy. It's something that you can't actually, perhaps Karen can't measure in pounds, shillings and pence. You can't say such and such a shop has taken more money because these people came and they dropped off their dry cleaning because they like walking in Nelson. But it's true. More people want to be in places where that heritage is still in existence. And this little square, this little area next to the town hall has that proud feeling of grand Victorian Nelson. And I think it's something, if we're spending government money, if we're spending money and the town deal and so on, and we've got the money, then we should do something like we did with Shackleton Hall in Colne. And I think that Philip Spur said it was a very gloomy potential. If we didn't find a tenant, this would be the money that we'd be having to spend. I'm really positive about it, like you are, as Chair, that we won't be having a long-term sort of revenue loss. I feel that it's definitely the right decision to at least keep the grandiose Victorian facade of Trafalgar House.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin?
Thank you, Chair. I think the academic arguments are nice, but this council does have strong financial reasons to be averse to risk. Philip, I don't want to call you out here, but you said hopefully 3 times in making your statements, which is maybe too hopeful, is too many. I think it's a gamble between sort of £3,000 to £27,000 on the negative side, and you've only got one positive outcome of around 10 grand. It's a big gamble, and that's every year we're taking that gamble. Every year we could have a tenant drop out, and that building is now making a loss. We're making decisions at budget which are in that range of monies for crucial services, and you add this on top, multiple years on the trot, and you've just got to think, what service is Pendle Council not going to be able to provide this time? It's for that reason which I can't really support a partial demolition. In regards to the car parking, I think it's a bad decision to form a permanent car park there. However, I know there's good reasons that car parks can be an interim land use until redevelopment can occur, and that can be a positive impact on the town centre. However, it shouldn't be a permanent construction facility. But yeah, I won't be voting in favour of partial demolition.
All those in favour of the motion, recommendation that was put forward? All those against? So that's carried. Next item is playing pitch strategy.
Good evening, everybody. The purpose of this report is for the executive to approve the playing pitch strategy that we've now got, note its contents, and for the recommendations contained within. The playing pitch strategy was commissioned in 2023. It takes a little while to do simply because you've got to look at the winter sports and the summer sports. And that was carried out by professional consultants at AKP, replacing the previous document that was in 2016. These documents only valid a maximum of 5 years because the demands of the sports at the time can change quite considerably. The report follows Sports England guidance and it looks at the current sports across the borough and the future demands as well. So it tries to predict the growth or decline of sports and looks at the population and facilities in the area. Basic assessments is taken. It's not full-on scientific surveys on every site, but it is by people, experts in their field, looking at the qualities of the facilities. They look at all the council sites, they look at the educational facilities of the schools and the colleges, they also look at anything in the private sector as well. So that would encourage sites such as Rolls-Royce, for instance. They look at the quality of the pitches that are available and the sports services, as well as all the ancillary, the access, the changing rooms, the stores, what facilities the clubs can use on the site. The outcome of these surveys, that then gives a steer as to how much usage those facilities can cope with. And as a result of that, where we go forwards. So unfortunately, Pendle does suffer very much with bad drainage, very clay-based geology. So the more wet the ground is in summary, the more badly drained it is. Less games can be played on it, soon compacts and gets very poor. So rather than being able to play 5 games on it, you can only play 1 game a week. The summary is our sites are played to capacity. Junior football, cricket and rugby are all over capacity. So in summary, there's too many games taking place for them to be in the best condition. But we still cope with the demand currently. Nobody misses out. It's recommended that we try and spread the load. Some of the sites that are less well used, we try and transfer the demand across those. But we need to try and improve the quality. Some of this can be simple upgrades and maintenance. Some of it requires capital works, which can range from 5,000 to 120,000 per pitch. So it's not to do the whole of Holt House, for example, that would be to do one pitch, each specific. Now, this report, we can share this with the other establishments, we can share it with individual clubs. They can then take this forward and they can help to get funding towards these schemes from external bodies, Sports England, Lancashire FA, Rugby Union Association, etc. And it's a very key document. And for us going forward, it's about encouraging those relationships with the teams and the clubs to help get the income from the externals as much as we possibly can, and to steer the use of Pendle resources where required to give the best sporting provision we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Councillor.
Yes, Chairman, can I commend Phil and other people who have been involved in drawing the strategy. I have looked at the documentation that lies behind the report that we've got in front of us today, and it is very, very detailed indeed and comprehensive. I'm going to have my finance hat on again and say, of course, there's no money. So the reference to getting external funding is critical. If we can't get funding from outside the money that we currently got, then none of these improvements that are required are going to take place. And that's really sad. I'll just refer to Victory Park in Balmoleswick, which I was quite shocked when it was described as poor. And thinking about the 2 pitches in front of the pavilion. My grandfather, Tom's great-grandfather, was involved in developing Victory Park, and I'm reasonably familiar with the makeup of the site, and a lot of the pitch area was developed through tipping of ash. It was a refuse site, and rather than the clay, which Phil's got a bit of a down on, quite rightly, that large 2-pitch area in front of the pavilion is tipped and has very good drainage. And I know from when we used to do a big bonfire and fireworks event, and I went on there with heavy machinery in literally this time of year, what a difference there is between the well-drained pitches and the peripheral area that didn't have the drainage. So I was quite shocked that that was thought to be poor, and interested to find out, what sort of investment is required to make them into good pitches. Chairman, I'm happy to move that we adopt this as a strategy, that we do seek that external funding, and that in terms of town and parish councils who are very much our partners in this provision, I think that in addition to our sharing the report with them, that we look to explore how town and parish councils can work with us in order to ensure that these pitches have as much use as they possibly can, and we make the best use of them. I think there is a possibility. Some parish councils already are direct providers of pitches. Others, I think, have a greater role that they could play if they wish to do so. So I think in the interest of trying to take this forward in as effectively as we can, that we just had a sentence in there seeing how town and parish councils can work with us to ensure this strategy is a success.
Okay. I'm happy to say Councillor Sutcliffe.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to draw your attention to the hockey findings and recommendations summary, because Pendle Forest Hockey Club are fantastically successful in their sphere, and they obviously prize their single pitch that they can play on, and I know that it needs some work. Now, I'm not a fan of football. I am a fan of what football does to communities. I think it's wonderful, it brings people together, but I'm not a fan of football in its essence. When you look at sports, football always takes precedent. It's always the thing that gets all the money, gets all the attention, and I think that's mainly because the focus is on it. Now, it's always good to go through the other sports that are available and say, are we supporting these enough? And I think that in terms of hockey and the success of the team, they need to be the provision of playing surfaces needs to be really carefully considered to make sure that they always have somewhere to play, because they have proven success. And one of the things that I was asked to mention by the club is that the surfaces that they can play on aren't necessarily football surfaces, but people can play football on a hockey surface. So if we're careful and clever about this with this strategy about the surfaces that we provide, then we can actually maximise the available surfaces for the hockey players to play on. And I would like to see something written into this strategy to that effect, that we're careful about who can use which facilities. You know, in downtimes, it might, you know, might be timetabling issues as an example, but make sure that the actual services are available for different uses. Well, a fantastic report as always, so thank you.
Councillor Henry?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, over the last 20 years, you know, we've actually lost a lot of good playing facilities. So if you look at Ben 10, where Marston Heights is at, Swindon, we've actually introduced a track there, we lost half of that ground. Edge End, we lost for many years, now obviously we're going to drop. Wingstone, we lost him, he used to be a fantastic cricket place. So many of these obviously are there, but I'm going to pick on cricket, for example. That's the one obviously I've been approached by colleagues and I get involved in. Cricket, 25 years ago, we used to have 32 teams. It went down to 5 teams about 5 years ago. So it's not picking up. And the league has 10 teams. So I went to the AGM a few weeks ago and I was told by them that they've got 4, 5 other teams waiting to join. They're not Pendle, they're coming from Blackburn, Hyndburn, you know, things like this. Whereas Blackburn are having up their own leagues, but this is a far better league and a better cricket standard. The reason they can't, because we don't have any additional cricket pitches. So obviously we've discussed this many times, but we need to start looking at these things, and obviously funding is a big issue. So wherever we can obviously go outside and try to get this. And I agree with yourself that one of the things we haven't done in the past is looked at grounds which can have multiple purposes. Okay, so you can play different games on it. Now, if people remember Ben 10, we used to have 3 football pitches and 2 cricket pitches. So summer and winter we used to change and use the same ground to play the games again. And why we are not doing that, I don't understand. It's something I think going forward, looking at the constraints we have, we need to start looking at those. I mean, streetwise basically. So excellent report. Thank you very much. But I think we need to really, sports is one of the things I think we do. Leisure and sports is an area which I think is lacking. We over the many years haven't paid much attention to this as a council, okay? Because our focus has been elsewhere, and I'm sure that's right. But we also now start looking at these things. So I think I support and second and third, whatever you want. But I think certain things we need to start picking and focusing on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Coleman-Price?
I wasn't going to talk about this, but just briefly about the cricket. I was really shocked when the Green Youth Action Group discovered that high schools don't play cricket. So Primus Academy, for example, they have no cricket nets, they have no cricket bats, they have nothing. We were able to get a grant and we start cricket, we do cricket with them throughout the whole year on Thursdays. And so none of these boys have played cricket. I'm afraid it is only boys that come to this. None of these boys have played cricket, and after 1 year, Primus Academy won a trophy for the whole of Pendle played cricket. So there is the interest, but I think you have to start them young. I would say that. I thought it was also a really interesting report, and noted that Cone has a dearth of football pitches, and also listens to what Councillor Whip had to say about ash and garbage sites and so forth. And I think Phil, who's looking at me because he knows exactly what I'm going to say, there is such a site in Cone, and it's in my ward, and it's King George V playing field, and it was a tip, and it's now just a sort of plateau. It's a plateau. And I would say that it would be the most perfect, it's well located, it would be the most perfect kit that we've shown we've got a dearth to be adopted. And we had an email this week to say that actually a club would like to take it on, so potentially there's no cost in terms of maintenance to Pendle. That would be a wonderful win. And also to say that I have been busy away trying to persuade the parish and town councils in my area to take on their pitches to lighten the burden for Pendle, so that Trawden is taking on its recreation ground, and that's with the legal department now. So that's a little bit off the money that we have to spend. And I sort of started with Combe Town Council and said, you know, if work was done and there was a pitch at King George V and we got a grant, I appreciate we'd have to apply for a grant to try to, at the moment it's completely inaccessible if you try to reach this pitch from Skipton Road. As I discovered to my embarrassing horror, there are 3 steep, what do you call them? Gradients? I don't know. They're very, very steep. And I thought, right, I'm going to attack this. I'm going to go at pace on the second one. And I hit a muddy patch. And it was one of those awfully embarrassing slow motion slides that was just broken by my litter picker. And then I bent my thumb all the way back and was just horribly embarrassed. People were obviously trying not to laugh. But essentially, if you can't get to that pitch, you can only reach it from the top, from Castle Road. That's suboptimal. We have to get steps. But, you know, I'll happily try to work to get funding so that we can reach it. But it would be marvellous. That would give us an extra pitch. And who knows, perhaps even a 3D pitch if we could go for that, because we've got a dirt there as well. But I think, yes, we've got to look at the things that we're good at, the things that we lack, and also places like King George V playing field that we already have but aren't on the radar in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Kieran.
I always hate travelling, Sarah, it just puts me off a bit with analogies there. But I'll tell you that I followed Councillor Hanif there because he was telling a story about the pictures that we used to have. I noted that in the report, the summary findings states that strategy shows that we have no existing playing fields that can be deemed surplus to requirements, which is nice that they're all being utilised, but probably shows that we need more. Turning to the full report, which I appreciate members not having in front of them, and I'll indulge myself on a picture in my ward. I was concerned to see the status comments around Barrowford Road playing field, which was the old Red Brick College. The comment in there that Nelson and Colne College is currently exploring alternative options for the site, as it's currently losing the college more money in maintenance than it brings in, and is becoming unsustainable. I'll refrain from using any expletives, but it sort of took something, because as part of the Section 106 agreement of the sale of the land for development, the remainder of the site was promised into perpetuity, as far as I'm concerned, for the residents and children of the borough to be used for exactly what it has been reinstated for in the last few years, which is children's playing fields. So that is, I'll be following it up with the executive members and officers later, but reading the report, I was glad I was sat down, because that is just tough as far as members of the council should be concerned, I think, because that as I said, that was the reason for the sale and the Section 106 there. So the report sort of contradicts itself there, in that we can't dispose of any, but it seems that the college is trying to find other uses, which probably means building on that. Echo the comments that other councillors have made there. Every time I see Phil and Keith and the team, they do an absolutely amazing job with the resources that they have. I was surprised, as Councillor Whip said there, that some of the pictures in my ward were graded poor. I thought they were pretty good, but what do I know? It'd be interesting to see the metrics and the rationale behind the scoring. I'm probably right to understand that. I think it's a great idea to bring it to parish and local area and see what we can do, but it's obvious that private external funding is needed. Again, I'll follow it up with an email later, but in Colne again, we have a potential sponsor of some of the pictures, and they even wish to build a pavilion on the site that I've already mentioned there as part of their regeneration projects for the town. So really good report, just to echo. It's the team do an amazing job. Not being an expert at all, I wouldn't have graded half of them poor, so again it's interesting to see what they are, but concern over the Barrowford Road site there from
Thank you.
So, can I just ask a really brief comment? This report is really interesting and really important, but it focuses on sport and leisure. Obviously, our leisure services in the borough are under review, and I think that this should form part of that review because it's about providing sport and leisure services, and I think that it would be remiss of us as a council to not address that and address the situation in the round. And so I'm just asking that this forms part of that in any sort of future conversations. We always focus on leisure centres, and understandably because of the finances. But there's obviously a lot of financial costs attached to these things as well. And if we're going to look at leisure, we have to include this. So please don't overlook this in any sort of leisure review coming forward in the future.
I mean, in front of us we've got obviously the main strategy itself, so we're going to obviously probably did more on this, but that's something we can probably link in the future. And also the cost element is a factor. So all those in favour? Thank you very much, Philip. Next item is operational services. Policy. David?
Policy links to enforcement activities such as the removal of waste items from private land, littering, failure to clear fouling and fly tipping offences. The Council's current policy is to provide an effective and efficient enforcement service. The written policy provides transparency in our decision-making processes and ensures that there continues to be continuity in the decisions made by authorised officers during investigations. We feel the written policy strengthens our arrangements and ensures that we proactively seek out best practice and guidance, which we feel will make us even more efficient and effective than we currently are. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I move that, because I think David and his team do an amazing job, so more power to his elbow, really.
Yeah, thank you. You second that. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, David? Would you say that you have enough sort of boots on the ground with regard to enforcement to fulfil this policy, which I thought was excellent?
Yeah, David?
Thank you, Chair. We could always do with more, is the honest answer. The challenges are out there. Yeah, give us the resources when we're facing.
So Peter Smith, the Pick Up the Pendle, rang me after his group did Central Nelson. They did Central Nelson under a viaduct opposite McDonald's and then Netherfield Road earlier in the week. And he just said, oh my goodness, I just feel that the enforcement in Burnley, I'm speaking for him, this isn't what I know, I don't know this. He's saying in Burnley the enforcement just seems to be so much more proactive, so much more successful. And he said if only we had more enforcement, because he was just saying this is the centre of Nelson and he picked up 14 purple bags in not a very large area. And that's an awful lot, isn't it? And that's no disrespect to you, because I know that area is regularly swept and cleaned, and I know that businesses like McDonald's clean round where they are. But these are people who are dropping this stuff who should be fined.
Thank you. Kieran?
Thank you, Chairman. A comment rather than a question. I think it needs to go through overviewing scrutiny, but the overviewing scrutiny committee brought to the executive through himself to request an update and status on what actions, if any, the exec were taking from the expiry of the district enforcement contract, whether a single contract was coming into place, what options were available, what expenditure, and all those sorts of questions. We met again this week, and our administrator advised that she hadn't had a response to ONS request for an update on those types of matters. It sort of falls into the same arena. So I think we'll meet again for a working group in December and then formally in January. But it has been, well, I didn't attend the meeting in September, so it was in July that ONS perhaps wrote to the executive. I might be wrong, it may have been September. It was a few months anyway. And we haven't had a formal response, so just a friendly prompt. I'm sure it's all become after this week's meeting.
But I think Councillor Vick probably will.
Again, I'm not asking for a response for a prompt as we're on this topic. It's best to come through ONS.
Yeah, Chair, that it hasn't come across my screen, I suppose, and we were quite clear in our agreement on the shared administration that we were not going to have district enforcement or their ilk operating in the borough. They have a licence to fleece people, and when they were operating in the borough, they did not achieve any greater cleanliness. I believe the trick to having greater cleanliness is to inculcate greater civic pride, and I think we can do that with positive measures rather than enforcement action. And whenever the ONS request to bring back district enforcement comes before us, I will be vehemently arguing against.
Thank you, Councillor. I hope that answers. There was an email to myself, to be honest with you, which I didn't, because I think we made that clear decision at the time. I didn't kind of sense what was being asked of me within the email. I think that kind of puts it quite clear there. Thank you very much, David. All those in favour?
Yeah.
Next item is number 10, refusal of driver's licence.
Yeah, I'll take that, Chair.
No.
Okay. I'll be very, very brief on this one, Chair. I think it's quite a familiar report to most members, in all honesty. So we're seeking executive endorsement of some proposed changes on wording of section 5.4 of the taxi licensing policy to effectively say, I suppose, give a little bit of discretion for new applications that come forward within 12 months of a previous revocation or refusal. Fairly straightforward, and the report sections 11, 12 and 13 go through the background and reasons for this in a bit more detail. I think it's worth pointing out a couple of process issues, if I may. First of all, I think most members will be aware that executive or taxi licence is not an executive function, so we're asking for your endorsement rather than your approval this evening. And the second point is this is a fairly circuitous route to get the report in front of you this evening. It has been through Council on 2 previous occasions, most recently in September, when it referred back to Executive for your consideration. So, subject to any views this evening, the intention is that it will go forward to full Council in December for a decision to be made at that point. So I'll probably leave it there, Chair.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for the clarification and for the information there. And I'll happily move the recommendations. Councillor Tomlin.
Chairman, it was my understanding that the Council has already considered this.
And agreed it.
Yes.
I did think that was the same, but I think it was brought back here for our kind of comments. So
I think the original resolution in September was that it come to the taxi licensing and here for consideration, but it come back to the full council at the next full council, which we've just had, for a decision to be made, and that decision has been made at the last council.
That's my understanding.
Sure. And that's we can endorse it.
We can endorse that decision that the council has made, but
council.
this wouldn't mean it would be brought back.
No, they won't be coming back. As long as we endorse it, it goes to the full council, and then Philip.
Yeah, I think, Council, we had a very similar conversation as officers, to be honest with you. So I think it's taken a very circuitous route. I mean, governance colleagues may wish to speak on this, but my understanding is that the former resolution of September Council was to refer it back to executive for. I can see Howard nodding. So it's taken a circuitous route.
This is because of that resolution.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, yeah. Have we seconded?
Yeah, yes.
All those in favour? Thank you. Handle health and wellbeing action plan.
Move it, Chair.
Yeah, I'll be second that. All those in favour?
Yeah.
Of course, one of revenue and capital outlay budget monthly report.
Chair, can I move this report? Gemma Louise is here and Karen's here to answer any detailed questions. This is after the first 3 months of the financial year, and clearly we've had a further 3 months now. It's my understanding, Chairman, that the position isn't getting any better, and I'm sad to report that the Nelson Town deal is sucking in resources. The revenue costs of Pendle Rise weren't budgeted for when the town deal was set up, and that's costing a significant amount of money. There are other costs involved as well, but the position of the second quarter is poorer than it was in the first quarter, and obviously set against the budget, that wasn't as good as it might have been either. So, Chair, I move the report. I live in hope that the financial settlement from government will be a wonderful cornucopia of fair financing, but that's probably a triumph of hope over experience.
Thank you. I'll happily second that. All those in favour?
Yeah. Land and property asset management strategy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name is Peter Gregory. I'm an interim employee of the council. I was brought in specifically to review and update the council's asset management strategy. And this report seeks approval for the outcome of that piece of work. And the document that you have before you is to replace the previous document approved by the council in 2018. Approval is particularly sought for the implementation of the action plan within the strategy that can be found in Appendix 8. That the council should have a recognised strategy for the management of its property assets is best practice, recognised by organisations such as the RICS or SIPA. I have set out the principles and desired outcomes of the strategy in both the report and the document itself. In simple terms, the objective is that each asset should make a useful contribution to the council's service delivery, improving those assets in order to improve the services that are delivered from them and improving the portfolio as a whole. When I started this piece of work back in July, Damon Lawrenson, who was previous Director of Resources, his brief to me was firstly to review and update the strategy from 2018, and also to frame the strategy in such a way that it could be used to drive transformation and change. I have subsequently maintained the same basic structure and principles as the previous strategy. The premise being that the type of asset and its use determines how property is managed and by whom it is managed in terms of council service. To seek to produce a document that drives change and improvement, I put a lot more detail in than was previously there into the context, the background and the objectives of the council, and I have included a comprehensive action plan as well. Finally, could I just please ask you to approve a third recommendation to this report, which isn't stated, to the effect that the Director of Resources should have the delegated authority to make non-material changes to the strategy during its lifetime. I'll leave it there, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I'm going to depart from the recommendations here. I think this needs a good coat of looking over, and my suggestion, Chairman, is that we ask overview and scrutiny to look at this in detail, and then come back with the draft strategy for us to consider alongside their comments on its content. And I do so, Chairman, because I think it's an important a key issue in terms of the way our assets are used, and I think there are significant issues in terms of the expectation of residents, the expectation of our officers, and it may be that we've got to balance off those perhaps not compatible expectations in agreeing the strategy. So what I'm proposing is that we ask overview scrutiny to look at it and come back with their comments.
Before I comment, Councillor Colin Price.
Thank you. I don't have a vote of course, but I think that that seems sensible. And I would also add that actually the local knowledge that the area committees have with regard to the areas in their areas might give more sense too. So for example, I did Treasure Our Town with the Town Council, and we found it was sort of covered in chippings, but also some bushes, but also some weeds, and also some litter. It was neither brilliant nor not brilliant. And I wrote to Philip Spur about it and said, what is this? And Tom Partridge wrote back and said, oh, it's got a good plum tree on it. And then Phil Riley wrote back and said, well, there's no money to look after it. So you've got this piece of land, it's not very big, it's probably the size of this room, and there's no money to look after it, there's no money to improve it, it has a sort of lowering tendency on the whole area, and I think those little spots that are neither, they lower an area, they could be lifted, and the potential liability could be taken away by being offered for small sums to adjacent houses. And I think that area committees would really know about all of that. I would like to make a plea, there's a slight alteration for you to take into account, which is the priority intervention. Bunkers Hill has 2 developers interested in it. I've written a lot to Philip about this, and IFTI knows about it too. There's actually a planning application for part of the site, and it's in the neighbourhood plan as a master planned area for development. We would really like to see this come forward. It's very stable, it's near the station, it's brownfield land, the area needs developing, so we're actually welcoming, it could take between 56 to 80 houses, depending on you know, the way that it's laid out. The downside is that there is Japanese knotweed on the site that we have been actively managing. So it's got a planning application on it now. I really would like to see that shifted into the priority intervention area, especially because we've actually done public consultation on this piece of land 3 times and only had positive comments from Konas. And actually, if you other councillors know, how often, when you say we're going to develop a piece of land, is this a good idea? How many times do you not get people sort of saying, yes, we'd like to see this come forward, as opposed to, no, don't do it. So actually, it would be an easy win for development for us and an improvement on the area. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. I'm not a property expert. I'm not at all, but I sort of occasionally look at local property prices, and I would just like to understand something on sort of like the raison d'etre of how you value things, because a lot of the things are things that, to my mind, can't be worth much because they are fixed in what they are. So if you take the Marsden, the Walton Lane Cemetery Chapel, for example, it's a Grade 2 listed building, it's Victorian, and you know that I love a grandiose Victorian building, but they're expensive to look after. It can only be a cemetery chapel, as far as I'm aware, and it's valued at £400,000. And yet I would almost think, my logic, not a property professional, would think that's actually not worth anything at all, because we know that there's outgoings all the time, and it can't be anything else. And similarly, this town hall, £4.3 million. Now, it could be something that other than the town hall. I heard that there was a previous chief executive who wanted to move out to a shed on Lomershire Industrial Estate. So it could be something else. It could be sold on the open market. But £4.3 million, that's a lot. And similarly, number 1 Market Street, 2.6 million. The depot, where all the various sort of David Walker and his team hang out, not a very lovely part of town, £1.6 million. Of course, that could be completely reversed from something else, but would it be worth 1.6 million? It seems a lot. Anyway, Tell me about it.
Without going into too much detail,
Okay.
Councillor, there is a proviso in the report about, there's a comment in the report about valuations, which are the valuations from the asset register.
Right.
Now the methodology of valuation for the asset register is specific for that purpose, and the basis of the valuation is laid down very specifically. So if you take, for example, the chapel, the method of valuation for that will be for a property which has no marketable opportunity, and therefore it's valued on the basis of how much it would cost to replace it.
Oh, so it's not how much it's worth, it's how much
it is
costs.
sometimes. It is sometimes. It depends on the property, depends on how it can be used, depends on whether or not it can be effectively sold on the open market.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that. We've got Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to go on a slightly different tangent. I'm aware that this council has migrated a lot of its land and assets to the town and parish councils of the area over the past sort of decade, and they don't necessarily have the resources to carry out something like this. Now I wonder if this council could have the capacity to offer this sort of undertaking as a service to those town and parish councils, which would have a beneficial interest for us to see more public buildings maintained and utilised to a high degree across the borough. So not necessarily part of the resolution, but maybe a plea for that to be considered.
Thank you. Kieran?
Just a really quick question, Chairman, through yourself to any of the officers that can help. I'm just wondering, there's a proposal there to defer this to ONS for review. Are there any statutory timescales that need to be looked at? No, that's fine.
To my knowledge, yeah, I've just asked the same question there. No,
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hanif.
Yeah, Chair, just following on from what Tom's saying, once we've actually produced this document, I think it would be advisable to discuss the portion for each of the relevant town and town councils. I don't know in Blythfield and Beasley what we have, as Pender Council. So as a town councillor, I actually don't know the same. So there might be things we might say, oh, we don't mind taking these on. So I think in the long term, I know we've discussed this in the past, but we've never actually done it. Once this is completed, I think we should have a discussion with the town and parish councils, because there are so many small parts of land and places like this, not necessarily big buildings, but the big buildings, which actually town and parish council might take over. So I think that is also something, maybe not now, but once it's done. So I'll second David's. They should go to ONS, but in the scheme of things, we should be looking at all of these things.
What was your wording again, David?
Oh, I don't know. That we refer this to ONS and consider it again with their comments alongside.
Yeah, and within 3 months, 2 months?
Well, I mean, as soon as possible.
As soon as possible, ideally, but
it's
not
up
for
to
Christmas
ONS.
as well,
Yeah.
You just don't want to prolong it.
There is.
We just met this month, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chair, there was a request as to whether area committees could have an input. I'm not sure whether that's feasible in terms of, I don't want to create an industry. So I would leave it with ONS, but if area committees want to stick their oar in.
You pull back by January, I think, because we don't want to do it too.
Okay. Yeah.
Councillor Martin.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. I don't disagree, however, as Councillor Whip pointed out, ONS already has its work programme and may feel that this is not something it wants to pick up. So obviously, whatever whatever you decide, you need to consider that ONS may actually not be able to look at this, or may choose not to look at it within the timescales.
Thank you, point noted. All those in favour? Next item is just for information of tenders and other control related matters.
Chair, happy to move that. You'll see the two first ones are UK SPF contracts, and there's a imperative to actually spend this money by the end of March. So our engineering staff are under the cosh now to ensure. There's also the work in Briarfield, which is part of the same UK SPF funding. So I think it's, sort of good luck.
Okay, the next item is matters referred from the area committees, and we've got 145 Walton Lane in Nelson.
Move the project.
Second that. Yeah. All those in favour?
Okay.
That's carried. Next item is a land adjoining Morgan Park Golf Course in Nelson.
Move the project.
Second.
Chairman, is it a grazing licence with an S or a grazing licence with a C? C.
Okay, all those in favour?
Yeah.
It's carried. Okay, so forward plan.
Noted, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.